So, yes, so I guess what I'll do is read this and then say what it is. So it is written in 1915 at the war, and by, as part of this debate, right, that starts to happen. Because if people who might not know this history that well, the Second International, everyone commits that they're not going to do it, and then one by one, basically all the socialist parties say, yeah, we're joining the war effort. It becomes politically too tense, right? In the same way that Irving Berlin got a lot of fucking flack for the anti-war song he wrote, and then only wrote patriotic songs basically forever. Yeah. So here is the quote. What is this war being fought for? What is bringing mankind unparalleled suffering? The government and the bourgeoisie of each belligerent country are squandering millions of rubles on hooks and newspapers so as to lay the blame on the foe, arouse the people's furious hatred of the enemy, and stop at no lie so as to depict themselves as the side that has been unjustly attacked and now is defending, the author puts scare quotes there, itself. In reality, this is a war between two groups of predatory great powers, and it is being fought for the partitioning of colonies, for the enslavement of other nations, and the advantages and privileges of the world market. This is a most reactionary war, a war of modern slaveholders aimed at preserving and consolidating capitalist slavery.
So this is either really obvious or really obscure.
It's very obvious.
So is it Lenin?
Yeah, it's Lenin. This is a piece written by Lenin in 1915 called Appeal on the War.
Yeah, okay.
So do you want to say something?
Right, we're pre-Russian Revolution.
That's
when this is written by a couple years. I think that, a good thing to kind of think about here is sort of like the clarity and the strength of that position, sort of in the lead up both to the Russian Revolution and also to the kind of decision, I guess, about whether to or how to feel about participation in this war, right? And it kind of deals with, it deals with both sort of the economic absurdity and the political absurdity of it, but also to some degree the effective absurdity of the whole thing.
That's precisely it.
So, go ahead, yeah.
And the other thing that I think is really important and resonant with this moment, and I don't want to be like, playing coy, right? Yeah. So there's currently a lot of military action. The immediate thing, right, is the Russian Federation has invaded Ukraine. I think everyone knows that. Yeah. God knows what will happen by the time this episode comes out. But one of the things that is really interesting about a conflict like World War I, and thinking about conflicts like this, or frankly many other recent conflicts, is that there is a strong tendency from liberal press to want to choose a hero and a villain. And one thing that makes Lenin's appeal, and by the way, this kind of message was very well received, at least amongst the Russian people, and many people around it. And you can tell this is aimed at a Russian audience, but he's talking about rubles and things like that, right? Was very, very well received, because in fact, just like these songs are saying, no one knew what the fuck this war was about. And in fact, he was basically saying, look, no one's good here. Everyone's a piece of shit here. The people on the ground are suffering, and they're like you and me, right? These other people, they're fighting for who gets to fuck the colonies, right? And, we might even do a thing on this, I'm not sure, but when you read contemporary commentaries on war, there is such a sort of either assumed or in fact often imposed. You must choose. Yeah. And if you don't, I'm old enough to remember, the first Gulf War and the second Gulf War, certainly the second, but even the first. And if you do not 100% lockstep, turn off your brain, cease your thinking functions, and just lockstep behind every single thing that your government says, you are A, for the other side, whatever it is, and B, you are in fact some kind of like terrible subversive. And one of the things that I think I find so powerful about this Lenin and how much it ties into a song like "And the Band Played Waltzing Matilda" is in fact appealing to the fact that in a conflict like this, it doesn't really actually make a lot of sense. And in fact, there are multi-causal factors in the global economy. If we're talking about the temporary thing, we're talking about energy markets, we're talking about all kinds of things that are going into this. We're talking about security, geopolitics. There's multi-causal elements. And if one engages in explanatory power, it is considered apologetics. And that's one of the reasons, in fact, that I think entering through culture can sometimes be slightly easier.
I mean, that's something we talked about. I mean, a fair amount on the show. I'd love to devote an episode to it.
Yeah, for sure.
But just how things become visible in the world of culture, the world of the aesthetic, in a way that is sometimes has a greater clarity than the way that they operate in the murk of politics or something. And I think too, it's something I would love to kind of pursue is sort of the question of propaganda, right? I'm not anti-propaganda, but I wanted to say the right stuff.
I wanted to say that the other thing that Lenin doesn't say here is like all war is terrible. Like, I mean, fucking Lenin. Right. So this is like there is a version of this sort of anti-war argument. It's just like, oh, all war is terrible. So if anytime there's a war, it's always bad. I don't really buy that. I will say. I know some people do, so that's okay. But yeah, he's not shying away from it. He's saying this war is some dumb shit. And he's like, he himself, right, is branded a criminal by his czarist government. But he himself is saying, I do not consider the czar and the queen, or was it the king at that time? The king, to be terribly different on this issue.
Absolutely.
The czar, the king, or the Kaiser. That's how I should say.
Well, and it's really interesting to compare kind of the rhetoric in this Lenin speech, or take like some of Rosa Luxemburg's work, or I mean, you could go to any number of people on the left in this period, but it's really interesting to compare that to the way, for instance, this gets covered in the popular press or in the sort of popular imagination, right? And this is on my mind particularly just because I got finished the other night teaching an installment of Proust, and that is a long novel in Search of Lost Time that is largely written during World War I, right? And it is a portrait of a kind of decadent society, right? And all the talk about stock certificates, there's quite a lot of it. All the talk about the Dreyfus affair, and all the talk about like jingoistic reasons why someone might go into combat, where there's a long scene in which people at a military encampment of officers are talking about the beauty of military strategy, right? So there's all this stuff in there that is really just it's very much this kind of with us or against us, right? Like one of the big problems of the Dreyfus affair, which gets debated at length in the novel, is that the Jew, right? This is about the trial of a Jewish officer who is accused of betraying France. It's Alfred Dreyfus, and one of the big debates is like whether a Jew can be truly French, right? And actually sort of put French nationalism before any other cause, right? Because the Jew is the perpetual other and the perpetual outsider in this particular culture. And so there's a lot to say about the particular structure of anti-Semitism there and all that stuff. But the reason why I sort of bring it up is because if you look at the way that the Dreyfus affair gets covered in the national press, the language is almost identical to the way that the run-up to World War I gets covered, and it's very much in terms of this kind of it's almost in a way a kind of masterwork of hypocrisy.
The masterwork of hypocrisy. Again, I don't know how bold I should be on our nominally. It's just about music criticism, but I'm thinking directly about things like that. It's been a topic that we've been thinking about for a while, even long before this sort of conflict sort of was bubbling up, to talk about, for example, the press has been essentially silent on things like the U.S. just currently under Biden has seized the assets of the Afghan people and who are starving and also facing drought. And it has just in the past couple of weeks just said we'll give half back. We're taking half, so they seized the sovereign wealth of the Afghan people and said we're keeping half. If that makes you starve, so be it. And they're giving it to 9/11 victims. That's a whole other thing.
Oh my God.
But it's a really good example of like we are dealing with multiple right-wing powers, multiple capitalist powers of different flavors, with different things, different animosities. Russia has gone to war many times. Sometimes, by the way, they think back to the Chechnya conflict with great American support, and then sometimes thinking of these multiple Ukraine conflicts with great American disdain. And it's sort of European, like the Europeans love to like throw the little like flag around or whatever like that. But the idea that they're gonna wean themselves, I've actually written about this from a very ecologically economic point of view. Even the supposedly like energy transition countries like Germany are basically it's all just smoke and mirrors. They just want unimported gas.
Well, I mean, I tend to think that some of this stuff becomes at least a little clearer, although no less complicated. If you just think of everything as a proxy war,
right? And I think to like bring us back to reel us in, to prevent me from just going into like total commentary, I think I wanted to put the like Lenin not only next to current events and like this kind of like just unthinking nature of what is foisted upon people, to in fact the difficulty and that it took to convince people that World War I was good, the tragedy that it was in fact probably to me it is basically the death knell of European socialism that of the socialist parties give in to nationalism. And they say, okay, we'll put aside our socialist shit, we'll do some nationalist shit for a while. It's like, no, they basically handed power. Yeah, that's some clingy shit.
Yeah.
And bringing it back to a song like "And the Band Played Waltzing Matilda," which is a post facto reflection on the I was tricked. Like 10 years later, I was tricked. The same way that if you look at like, it was rough in the Iraq War and the Second Iraq War for some people. There were many, like the world's largest protests were against the Second Iraq War. But once that shit got rolling and the media got involved, it was very hard and very, very lonely to be on the anti-war side. And then 10 years later, everyone was like, oh my God, this is the dumbest thing ever.
Yeah, well, and I think it's, I mean, we'll get back to the song in a moment, but just to kind of elaborate on sort of the way that wars get sold, right? And this question of propaganda. I mean, it functions by making it so that there's no really kind of, if you're thinking, right, if you don't turn your brain off, it makes it so there is no kind of public example of shared rhetoric that you can fit yourself into,
well, there is. Michael Brogan, American political scientist, you know his work, right? Wrote a lot about films and things like that, and talked about Ronald Reagan in his book on Ronald Reagan and American Demonology, I think.
I haven't read that.
Oh, yeah, but he talked about like this sort of appeal to like Star Wars narratives.
Right, exactly.
And it's just funny. I just saw like a Maureen Dowd like line where she was like, "Look, right, these people are the like." Emperor Palpatine, and these people are the Jedi, and it is like comical, especially if you're someone who's like read the culture industry. You're like, wow, or like this happens all the time with like a popular TV show. It's actually not popular. Whatever, I don't want to get this popularity, but like Star Wars is unquestionably popular and well known. But the idea that the world actually works like Star Wars is like a sign of like just either shared mendacity or unbelievable stupidity.
Yeah. Also, I mean, my God, it is the most hackneyed play from that rhetorical playbook, and yet, they don't even have to be imaginative about it because it just kind of seems to work, and which I find offensive. But
I find it offensive. I mean, like I said, one of the things that when I'm listening to a song like the Pogues or their cover of "And the Band Played Waltzing Matilda," is that they are in fact tugging musically and lyrically on these same sort of heartstrings, if you will.
Yeah.
But they're tugging on them subversively, right? They're using this traditional sort of what you might even call a national tradition in the post-nationalist era. And by the way, Irish nationalism is very different, I would argue, than great power nationalism, right? Anti-colonial nationalism and all, like they don't, like, this is a more complicated question than just, oh, all nationalism good, all nationalism bad. Well, sometimes, you know, and there's plenty of good authors on that. Lenin's one of them, Fanon's one of them, plenty of people have written about that. But if I'm going to listen to a piece of music like that with these kinds of antennae up, right? All of a sudden I'm like, oh, right, you're actually very carefully saying, yeah, these traditions aren't your exclusive territory. And they don't just say what you say they say.
And that's why kind of this is such a great song for the Pogues in particular. And you've already pointed out the blend of kind of traditionalist or folkish kind of motifs in what they do, and then the sort of punk sensibility as well. And that's almost exactly what's going on in the rhetoric of this song, right? And it's also kind of an example, I think, of how kind of not only the uses of sentiment, right, but the idea that sentiment itself can be like you need an outlet for this kind of affect, right? Like where do you put it? And this gives us a kind of object around which we can cluster in a certain way, right? I mean, maybe that's all music in a sense, right? But, but I do think there's a specific way that that's working here.
And it is working, I think, at that sort of affective, personal level in a way that, like, something like what I just read from Lenin is addressing that affective, personal level from the viewpoint of there is more happening here than anyone is allowing you. Like, I'm trying, like no one's letting you in on how this is working.
I mean, and it's also in a completely different way from the sort of public address, which is the Lenin mode most of the time, actually.
Yeah, a lot of these, I think, are newspaper articles and things like that.
Right, exactly. So this mode of public address, I mean, this is a much more kind of intimate sort of.
Yes, that's right.
Approach.
And this is, Lenin could be very vicious, but he's seldom melancholic.
Yes.
And these songs are deeply melancholic.
Yeah, very melancholic, but I think not in a sort of left melancholy kind.
Yeah, good catch.
Which is, I think, mostly to be desired. So one thing that I'm noting about the narrator of this song too is that there are all of these, I think, not clunky, but really beautifully sort of integrated ways in which we see this person's positioning with respect to the other people in the world that he moves, right? And the social element is not kind of, I mean, it's obvious, but it's not hitting you over the head, in the sense that, like, people are asking him, like, hey man, like, why are people marching, right? And there's this sense of kind of social exchange, right? And sort of mass confusion that sort of never loses sight, right? Of the fact that it's this guy's life and it's this guy's story. So I think that actually is something that's really kind of worth noting about, if I may, the poetics of this song.